Hello, everybody. Welcome. Welcome to the June National Activist Call, and thanks so much for joining us tonight, whether you are on Zoom, YouTube, Twitter, or Facebook. My name is Sarah Marino, and I'm with the Indivisible organizing team. It's nice to see so many folks from the Indivisible community coming together tonight, whatever platform you may be joining us on. In light of the ongoing crises in our country, we are having a unique national call where we'll hear from our co-executive director, Leah Greenberg, and then spend the bulk of the program on a training workshop focused on organizing amidst racial violence. We have a national crisis of violence against Black people in this country. Thousands of Black people have been killed by police in the last decade, with Breonna Taylor, George Floyd, Ahmaud Arbery, Tony McDade, David McAtee as some of the current in all of our minds. This is a devastating, ongoing situation in our country that for many has just become front of mind in the last few weeks. I cannot begin to understand how the Black folks in our Indivisible community are feeling right now. And for those of us who are not Black, now is the moment to lean into our action, our listening, our learning, and our following. We always want to make sure these calls are right for the present moment. We had an entirely different agenda set for this call, and I know some folks may not have seen the new plan before you signed up. You may have registered several weeks ago, but this is the type of moment that calls on us to drop everything else and assess how we can show up, whatever showing up means individually, and be supportive. Before diving into the full call, I'm here to just kick us off, share some helpful logistics and expectations, and review the agenda for tonight. As I mentioned at the start of this call, this is our June National Activist Call. If you've never been on one of our national calls, we have these the first Thursday of each month, and they're really meant for everyone: Indivisible group leaders, group members, and other Indivisible activists. I love these spaces because it brings together everyone ranging from brand new activists who are dipping a toe into activism for the first time and want to learn how to get started, to decades-long activists who have been leading local Indivisible groups for years. To that end, we do try to tailor the content of these calls specifically to a wide audience. So we'll do our best not to use too much lingo or make assumptions for folks who are new. And for those where there may be some content that feels like a refresher, please bear with us. When I hand it over to our training team, they'll be setting a few community agreements as we dive into the workshop. But before we do that, I want to share a few logistics. As you likely already know, if you're watching this on social media or YouTube, we decided to live stream this particular national call to reach a wider audience. If you need or would like to have closed captioning, we have that available through our live stream. If you're joining on Zoom and want to move over to our live stream, you can access that via indivisible.org/live training. That's just indivisible.org/live training. If you are on Zoom, you'll be able to ask questions in the Q&A box on the bottom of your screen. We'll be answering some questions at the very end. We have the chat box open currently on Zoom so that you can introduce yourself and interact for now. but we will be disabling it shortly so folks can focus on the training and we can easily take questions from the Q&A. Additionally, for those on Zoom, we are using Zoom webinar, so you'll only be able to see the presenters rather than everyone on the call, and you won't be able to unmute yourself. If you are on Facebook, Twitter, or YouTube, you can ask questions or share thoughts in the relevant comment section or chat box of whichever platform you're on. We have a team of moderators who will be staffing each of these platforms, and they're there to share resources and answer quick questions. They're also there to support everyone's learning and offer corrections. At Indivisible, we like to think of feedback and correction as a gift. So if you're corrected by a moderator in one of the chat boxes, we hope that you'll be receptive to that learning. And I do need to say, if participants use inappropriate, harmful, or racist language, we will be removing them from the call. So to that end, to get into the agenda, tonight we will be starting off hearing from Leah Greenberg, Indivisible co-founder and co-executive director. And then the majority of the call will be a training workshop focused on how to use the fundamentals of relational organizing to escalate white folks and non-Black people of color from allies to accomplices, both in casual conversations and in concrete anti-racist action steps within our communities. Given the depth of this topic that we're going into, we're expecting this call to be a bit longer than usual, and it should run from about 9:30 p.m. Until about 9:30 p.m. Eastern, 6:30 p.m. Pacific, to allow time for questions and to really get into this training. So should you need to leave a bit early, we will be recording and sending the recording out after. I see some folks have that question already. It will be recorded. All right, I think that is enough for me. Without further ado, I'm going to hand it over to Leah Greenberg, Indivisible co-executive director.
Thank you, Sarah, and I'm glad to be here with you tonight for this important training, and thankful to the team for bringing this together. I'll just start by offering a few thoughts on how we see the moment to set the tone for the training. This is a moment when the pure malevolence of white supremacy and the fundamentally racist, repressive roots of our policing system is on display for everyone to see, and specifically to see what Black people have understood for generations. This is not the moment we're in is not a sudden reaction to a horrific killing. It's the product of centuries of systemic oppression and of the reality that police killing and terrorizing Black people has been an ever-present reality in American life. It's not a moment to talk about bad apples. It's a moment to recognize that this is about a system that's fundamentally rotten, designed to terrorize instead of protect. It's not a moment to wring our hands about property damage or disruption, but a moment to stand in fierce solidarity and demand dignity, justice, and safety for Black people in this country. It is a moment to follow the lead of the powerful movement for racial justice in this country, of Black-led organizations and Black activists who've been leading this charge and who are leading it now. And in doing so, we put together a set of resources and asks for you on how to stand in solidarity, how to make your voice heard, how to keep up the pressure on Minneapolis for justice, how to push your own local government for change. And we'll talk about how to do that some tonight. I want to also recognize that this is a moment of really deep pain, grief, anger, fear, exhaustion, so many emotions that I can't even name, especially for people of color and for Black people. For those joining us who are people of color, and especially for our Black Indivisible movement family, we see you, our hearts are aching with you right now, we stand with you. And as a white woman, speaking to the folks on this call who are not Black, this also has to be a moment of reflection for us, of learning and challenging ourselves, of leaning into talking to our own white family, friends, and neighbors about what is happening in this country. We all know that white supremacy is in our history. It's in the air we breathe. Racism is not and cannot be the burden of people of color to fix. Anti-Blackness should not and cannot be the burden of Black people to address. We have to educate ourselves, and then we have to bring others along with us. That is a crucial part of how we show up in this moment. That's why this training is so important, why I'm glad you're here with us tonight, so we can all be part of this cycle of education and action. So thank you, and with that, I'm excited to turn it over to the trainers to get started.
Thank you so much, Leah. Thanks for grounding us in all those important reminders. So as Leah said, we're now going to hand it over to the incredible Indivisible training team. They will be taking over the rest of this call and diving into a brand new training that they have been working really hard on over the last week to be tailored to fit this specific moment that we're in. So to bring us through this learning, I'd like to introduce, to start off, Carly Kass, a senior training associate on our team.
Thanks, Sarah. Hey, y'all. My name is Carly Kass, and I'm super excited to be joined tonight by my colleagues, Raquel Jackson-Stone and Nora Sharp. As Sarah mentioned, we are members of the Indivisible training team, and on behalf of the entire team, thank you for being with us tonight, and thank you for letting us take over your call. For the past several days, Indivisibles across the country have been asking how they can show up in this moment. We are witnessing protests from small towns to major cities across the nation in honor of George Floyd, Breonna Taylor, Tonya McDade, Ahmaud Arbery. We are seeing action being taken against continuous killing of Black people by police and white supremacist violence. And as uncomfortable as it may be, we decided as a team that it would be important for us to join tonight's call to talk about how we came to this place as a country and how non-Black Indivisibles can act as allies in this moment. Before we jump in, I want to acknowledge that although a majority of folks across our Indivisible network are white, we have many members of our network and community that are Black and non-Black POC. This workshop was specifically written with white folks and non-Black Indivisibles in mind. We do not want to, by any means, conflate the experience of white people and non-Black POC. Rather, we want to center a specific harm that is being done right now to Black Americans, past and present, in order to highlight how we as non-Black allies can help play a role in undoing the systems that have caused so much harm. And to our Black Indivisibles across the country, we welcome your presence here and any feedback you may be willing to share. And if you feel like you'd rather spend your time elsewhere this evening, we welcome that decision too. This workshop should run about 1 hour and 10 minutes and is not comprehensive by any means. We know there's so much to learn. I want to thank you for joining us tonight in this moment, in community, and to be clear, we're learning too. All right, y'all, let's get into it. I want to do a brief overview of tonight's agenda. We're going to be talking about some norms in a second. We're going to provide some context and historical background on how we got to this place in our country. We're going to pull out our organizer toolbox, and we're going to get to work. We're going to go over some next steps and to-dos. As Sarah mentioned, we're going to host a quick Q&A. And finally, we'll leave you with some resources for further learning. Sorry, y'all, words are hard. All right, some quick housekeeping. First, we have disabled the chat box in Zoom. If you are in Zoom, please feel free to use the Q&A function to post your questions. And I'm really excited to say that we're live streaming across Twitter, Facebook, and YouTube right now. We have staff moderating in real time, so please ask your questions in the chat box there. Unfortunately, not all questions will be answered, but please know we see them. We'll try and follow up with folks post-workshop, and we are listening. I would like to take this time to talk about a few community agreements for our workshop today. These are specifically important in today's workshop as we're all virtual. And I know firsthand how easy it is to type a response out of frustration without taking a second to pause or even hang up the call. First, I want to ask folks, as if they are able, to limit distractions. We want to make sure that we're all here together. So if you're able, go to a quiet place. Put your phone on silent. Join us in focusing on the training, not multitasking. Second, we ask you to take pause. Tonight, you may hear some concepts that you might not agree with, or maybe need further clarification, or just don't feel right. We ask before dismissing the idea, you take a pause and ask, why does that cause you so much frustration? And finally, acknowledge the journey. Some of us have been doing this work for years, joining tonight in solidarity. Some of us are new and excited to learn. It's important for us to acknowledge that we're all in this journey together, and sometimes that's uncomfortable and honestly, kind of scary. So I hope you're as excited as I am. I'm going to toss it to my friend Nora to get us started.
Okay, awesome. Thank you so much, Carly and Sarah and Leah, who spoke already. So before we talk about how we can take action this moment, we need to take some time to examine the structures and systems that shape where we are today. To put it straightforwardly, the United States was founded on and continues to exist because of institutional racism in our daily lives, in government structures, law enforcement systems, and more. There's a lot of working definitions that we can use for institutional racism, but one that we're trying out tonight is the systematic distribution of resources, power, and opportunity in our society to the benefit of people who are white and the exclusion of people of color. For credit's sake, this definition comes from a couple organizations in particular, Racial Equity Tools and Solid Ground. And for the next few moments, I'm going to be referencing a lot of their language as well. So shout out to them. Present-day racism comes from a long history of racially distributed resources and ideas that shape our view of ourselves and others. It's a hierarchical system, and it comes with a broad range of policies and institutions that keep it in place. In the United States, institutional racism has been responsible for slavery, settlement, native reservations, segregation, internment camps, and so much more. And while many of these specific institutions no longer exist in their original forms, they have had long-term impacts on our society. And we can see this through generational wealth and current income disparities, through the criminal justice systems that disproportionately incarcerate and harm communities of color, through access to job opportunities, positions of political power, and through our healthcare and in many other ways, those systems affect us. The thing is, these harmful disparities aren't just an accident. They're a direct result of public policy and white supremacist histories, despite a lot of laws that were passed in the mid-20th century and beyond to make discrimination theoretically illegal or to otherwise expand civil rights. So I want to be really clear now and going forward, this is just the tip of the iceberg in naming and describing institutional racism. These ideas may be new to some people on this call tonight. A lot of folks may have questions, and those questions really matter, even if we can't answer all of them tonight. And what's more, some of you probably know everything I just briefly said, and some of you probably know way more than what I just shared. So there's a lot that's worth knowing in our history, and that's part of what makes anti-racism a lifelong practice. So for now, though, now that we've kind of scratched the surface of at least some kind of, in this moment, shared understanding of what we talk about when we talk about institutional racism, I want to transition into looking at our country's history, specifically when it comes to the police. The genesis of modern day police systems is what used to be called slave patrol. From the history I learned about this, which is certainly far from complete, the first formal slave patrol was created in the Carolina colonies in 1704. And these patrols had three primary functions that were all interrelated. One was to chase down and apprehend Black people who had escaped enslavement and return them to those people often referred to as their owners. Another was to provide a form of organized terror to deter slave revolt and rebellion. And finally, to generally maintain discipline on plantations themselves. After the Civil War took place, these types of organizations evolved into modern day police departments. And their main role, particularly in the South, was to control formerly enslaved Black people who were often now working as laborers in agriculture in the South. And eventually these same patrols turned police also enforced the Jim Crow segregation laws of the 19th and early 20th centuries. And meanwhile, the prisons and jail systems that police forces support themselves became a continued site of slave labor that has lasted till today. So today, incarcerated people are put to work for little to no pay. Just a side note, we're gonna do resources later on, but if you wanna learn more about this history specifically, I strongly recommend the classic documentary 13th by Ava DuVernay. It's on Netflix, so. All right, and just a few more words on this. Modern police forces across the US emerged as a response to kind of a generalized notion of disorder. But that definition of disorder depended heavily on individual cities or towns and on the social and political influences in those places, none of which necessarily has anything to do with notions of serving or protecting or generally supporting justice. And we can see this in the modern day results, as we can see the results, the modern day results of this history in the case of Ahmaud Arbery, who was killed by one former police officer and whose case was likely not pursued until the release of video because of the values and histories that were at home at that local precinct. Okay, that was a lot. And I want to take a moment to acknowledge anyone on the call tonight who may themselves or their families or friends have been harmed by the criminal justice system or by police. I know going over all these details and rehashing them can be intense or triggering, and so I honor anyone who found that last section maybe hard to be present for, and my hope is that our work tonight moves us a few notches closer to repair. And again, as always, I want to reiterate, this is not all the information worth knowing, it's a start. All right, so knowing the history of police is helpful right now, and it's also important for us to have a shared understanding of some history and definition of protest. So we could go way back in history to peasants protesting against feudal lords in Europe in the 13th century and continue all the way from there. Unfortunately, we don't have time for all of that. But we do want to note that protesting has been a function of society for centuries. I will mention that this particular definition of protest here is Indivisible's special collaboration with the Merriam-Webster Dictionary. That aside, what we're talking about is an expression or declaration of objection, disapproval, or dissent, often against those with structural power. So, protest has a deep history, like I just mentioned, but a couple of key points. First, what's considered peaceful versus violent evolves over time. Just to take one example, some people on the call tonight may be familiar with the women's suffrage movement. And as it turns out, many of those women known as the suffragettes were viewed as anarchists or even terrorists during the early 1900s. And now, in a lot of cases, they're viewed as feminist heroes. I do want to flag that some feminist movements led by white women, such as women's suffrage, historically did exclude women of color. So I bring them up not to overly pedestalize them, but to make the point that our ideas of acceptable protest change over time. And we might be surprised to learn just what kinds of actions our heroes took to effectively make change. Another core example, I noticed that at times of highly visible racial injustice in the 21st century, it's pretty common for folks to post or talk or even kind of grandstand sometimes about the peaceful protests led by Martin Luther King Jr. in the 60s. At that time, many of those protests were considered acts of aggression, and Martin Luther King himself was arrested 37 times. Meanwhile, these days, white people sometimes make the mistake of using quotes from Martin Luther King to justify their own inaction, or sometimes even as a weapon to shut down conversation or gaslight Black activists about their methods. My point is, if you find yourself wanting this moment in history to be different than what it looks like, and specifically more comfortable, try bringing a little skepticism to that yearning for comfort. And as always, keep learning about our history. Last but not least in this section, I want to share a couple popular images about protest and to talk about why they're popular. So this is a pretty common meme. A lot of people might have seen it before. It shows the quote, "Why can't they protest peacefully?" And then a couple of other images of cases of what a lot of folks might consider peaceful protests that received a lot of really strong criticism from dominant white voices when they happened. And then next, in contrast, is an image you might have seen going around from the recent stay-at-home protests. This one specifically, I believe, from the state capitol in Michigan. And I think why it's gone around so much and why people find it powerful or meaningful is that it shows what a lot of us might view as an aggressive moment on the part of a white man as he leans in toward the police with no mask, by the way. And the police remain, at least seemingly in this moment, unperturbed and not moving in a direction of harming him in response. So again, my point is, it's important to be skeptical of the yearning for peaceful protest, especially from those of us who haven't been harmed by police violence as directly. because the permission to be peaceful or violent gets distributed in very different ways to different people in this country. All right, so we wanted to start this overview to make sure we at least have some kind of shared understanding of how we got to this moment, and hopefully just provide some more historical context to aid you in your conversations. And that's where we're gonna be going next, is to our next session of talking about how Indivisibles can take action during this time. So I'm gonna pass it off to my colleague Raquel to talk about relational organizing.
Thank you so much, Nora, and hello, everybody. I am Raquel, and I work on the Indivisible training team as the Senior Training Associate for the Midwest. We have been seeing Indivisibles from across the country responding in this moment by taking action. And maybe you have to. You can go to the Indivisible website to find a full list of recommended actions and resources that have been developed in solidarity with activists from across the country, and namely Black-led organizations who are the leaders in this fight for justice. For those of you logging in through Zoom, we will email you the link, and for those on live stream, the moderators are about to share the link, so no worries about that. The first set of actions that Indivisibles have been taking has to do with people power. First, call your local officials and tell them to defund your local police department and invest those funds in resources that people need, and especially for Black communities, Indigenous communities, and communities of color. We ask you to ask your representative, call them up and ask them to co-sponsor the Omar Presley resolution. And we also ask everyone to protest safely. The second bucket of actions has to do with another form of power in this country, namely money. Structural racism plays an immense role in economic inequality across the United States. At $171,000, the net worth of a typical white family is nearly 10 times greater than that of a Black family at $17,150 in 2016. Gaps in wealth between Black and white households reveal the effects of racism, accumulated inequality, and discrimination. And for those reasons, those of us with the means to do so are being asked to donate directly to Black-led organizations and impacted communities. Which brings us to the ask that we'll be focusing on for the rest of the training this evening. This next section is open for everyone, but I do want to note that I'm talking directly to those of us who are non-Black. Your task is to move those around you, again, especially white people and non-Black people of color, move them away from internalized racism toward anti-racist action. Before I go further into this ask, I'd like to discuss an organizing tactic that I'm sure many of you on this call have heard of: relational organizing. Relational organizing is leveraging your personal networks and connections to accomplish an organizing goal. Now, I'd like you to think back to a time when you took an action that was a little scary for you. Maybe it made you a little uncomfortable. It can be about anything. For example, I'll share mine while I ask y'all to think of yours. A family member asked me to do a 3-part immersive workshop on emotional intelligence. Now, I didn't know what that was. I didn't know what emotional intelligence was. And I never thought I would pay hundreds of dollars on something that I didn't get a certificate from. But I trusted her. She said it changed her perspective on her life, and I saw how much her attitude changed after doing this course. So even though I was still unsure, I took the course. And honestly, I'm so thankful that I got over that fear and just paid the money and did it. Emotional intelligence is so important in my organizing work. I learned how the experiences from my childhood impact how I relate to other people, and how I thought about myself. And I am so thankful that I did that. So I'll give everyone a few seconds to think of their own example. You got it? Okay, you got it now. Good job. So thinking about your example, what was the reason that you said yes? So we've asked this questions in hundreds of training, and most of the time, folks have one or two answers why they said yes. One, because I cared so deeply about the issue at hand that I just pushed past my fear, or because I trusted the person who asked me to take that action. Other examples of how we have used relational organizing in the past as Indivisibles. One thing that I've done is voting accountability buddies. This is when you reach out to your network and your friends, make sure that they have registered to vote and that they have a plan to vote to make sure that everyone in your network really goes out and hits the polls. As organizers, we know an ask from a trusted member of our network is much more effective than an ask from a stranger. This is really foundational to the basis of relational organizing. And so now I will hand back to Nora, who will talk more about how you can use relational organizing to move people from allies to accomplices.
Okay, awesome. Thank you so much, Raquel. Yeah, so this brings us to our evening's kind of core action step and ask, which is for white people and non-Black people of color on this call tonight to take time within the week ahead to actively participate in conversations with other non-Black people in your life about their relationships to the protests that are happening across the country and the violence against Black lives within our systems. So for many of you, these conversations are probably already happening, and if the case, that's awesome. We ask you to continue them and that you use these conversations to continually move those you're talking to greater levels of action. One word you're hearing tonight, or will in the next few slides if you haven't already, is anti-racism. We're not doing a deep dive on that concept tonight, but I do just want to take a second to define our terms. We could go a lot deeper, of course. We just won't be doing that tonight. So there's a lot of different definitions of anti-racism, and I encourage you to read as many as you can find. But one I found for now that I liked is the active process of identifying and eliminating racism by changing systems, organizational structures, policies, and practices and attitudes so that power is redistributed and shared equitably. That can look like a lot of different things, and what we're offering tonight is one possible pathway. To be clear about it, right now and going forward, anti-racism is not a place that we arrive to, but a lifelong practice. And I really want to just briefly personally shout out so many people in my life who have shown me that and brought me to that ever-growing understanding over time. Hard conversations are always going to be a key part of this ongoing practice. One of the reasons that conversations can indeed be hard is because inevitably we encounter perspectives we disagree with or statements we find problematic. And it can be pretty confusing to know what to say to somebody, whether that's a stranger or a loved one or someone anywhere in between, when they say something that you don't think is right. And right now, there are a couple of common things you might be seeing people do or say in relation to the protests that are happening. On one hand, many people in your communities might be super fired up, charged up, activated, enthusiastic to support movements for Black lives and many other anti-racist movements, and already taking action steps that are available to them. On the other hand, you may find that some people you're talking to who are in positions of relative privilege, those who are just generally not direct targets of police violence, may express possibly more concern about property damage or looting than about the historic and immediate violence that spurred these protests. And that's the theme that we're going to be focusing on right now. So, and Leah made a really strong point about this earlier on about people over property. Indivisible believes it's crucial to redirect those kinds of concerns toward anti-racist perspectives and actions. We acknowledge that people in communities who have been heavily impacted by police violence may have complex relationships to property damage within their own neighborhoods. And amidst these complex relationships, for right now, in this moment, what we're asking people in positions of privilege to do is to focus the conversations on the root causes of protest in the first place, which are, again, historic and immediate racial violence enacted by police, law enforcement, and other structural systems. So in the next few slides, we're going to look at a couple of common themes and concerns you might hear in conversation. And for each one, we're going to introduce a relational organizing best practice and show how you could use it in a sample response to somebody. And then Carly and I are going to role play one of these common themes, which for some reason I can't help but be a little excited about. So here's some of the conversation best practices we're going to be looking at. We've got lead with curiosity, share your experience, amplify those most affected. And then following that, we've got validate your own ignorance, redirect to shared values, and appeal to people's best self, appeal to someone's best self. Okay, let's start with one kind of common conversational theme you might hear these days. Kind of a broad statement of, it's just so horrible or awful or crazy what's going on right now. I can't believe it. Side note, we want to be thoughtful about how we use the word crazy casually. The practice I'd like to introduce for these kind of moments is to lead with curiosity. So especially when a white person shares a broad, kind of unspecific concern or expression of horror, we want to get curious about what they're feeling horrified about. And then depending on how they respond, non-judgmentally encourage their horror in a productive direction. So for instance, you could say something like, I'm feeling pretty concerned as well. What's most upsetting to you right now? And then make sure to listen to their answer. Okay, here's another one. Something like, I don't support police violence, but the curfew seems justified, or bringing in the National Guard seems justified, or some other government measure that maybe comes from authoritarian or white supremacist practices seems justified to keep the peace, or something along those lines. We've got a few different best practices for this. I'm going to kind of pack them in, so just bear with me. One option is to share your experience. So do you feel negatively impacted by what the person you're talking to is saying is justified, or do you know people who were? If so, you can speak to that. You can say, those measures don't make me feel safe because they're being enforced by police systems that motivated these protests in the first place, or whatever's true for you. Okay, option B, you can amplify those most affected. So if you haven't been directly affected by measures meant to shut down protests, but you know people who were, you could say, the communities I'm familiar with who are protesting right now believe the curfew is just a blank slate to arrest people, and I believe them because they're on the front lines. Okay, last but not least, option C is validate your own ignorance. And I do want to give a caveat about this. I really love this particular one, but I want to be clear. When I say validate your own ignorance, I'm not encouraging folks to use ignorance as an excuse for not doing anything or to stop where you are, but just to say that if you don't know what to say in response to someone else's argument or point, or if you don't have enough information to assuage their concern, that's okay. Your feelings and your beliefs and what you're arguing for is still valid. So you could just say something like, I'm honestly not sure about that, or I don't have enough information to speak to that impact, but I still feel angry and concerned about the violence against Black lives that got us here. Okay, and then last but not least, a very common theme right now, you might be hearing folks say something like, I support the protesters, but violence never helps, or rioting never helps, or looting never helps. The best practice we want to offer here is primarily to redirect to shared values with a side dose of appeal to their best self. So a couple notes here. With redirect to shared values, for one thing, we want to avoid rabbit holing about the specific thing the person is arguing for or against, not because we don't care what they think about that, but just because it can be more productive to focus on the values and the needs underneath that person really cares about and that you care about too. And that kind of brings us to the part about appealing to their best self. Sometimes the easiest way to get someone on board with what you're saying is to talk to them as if they already are, or imagine that you're talking to some part of them deeper down that's already with you or already has the capacity to be with you. Okay, so let's get to it. We're going to try our little role play here. Carly's going to come online. Carly, you good?
I'm good. I'm back.
All right. So we're going to go through a role play of a conversation, kind of like one of these. And just for a little imaginative context, Carly and I are imagining that we're cousins who are also friends, and maybe we keep in touch sometimes and not so much other times. But now we're checking in for the first time in a little while. So Carly, take it away.
Awesome. Hey, cousin, I haven't talked to you in a minute. How you doing?
Carly, I'm doing okay. Yeah, things are all right.
Oh, so good to hear. Are you working? Are you still doing that marketing gig?
Yeah, they cut my hours a little bit, as obviously is happening to a lot of people. But I am working from home. So, and honestly, I'm saving a lot of money that way. Like there's nowhere to go or spend money on. So yeah, it's all right for now. Yeah. How about you?
Honestly, pretty similar situation. They cut my hours at the store, but a lot of my friends got laid off. I'm worried about our small business community, but I'm doing all right myself.
Yeah, I really hear you on that. And same with my friends. And I mean, yeah, honestly, everything's just been really crazy right now. Like even outside the pandemic, I just feel like there's been a lot of horrifying. I can't help but feel pretty upset with everything that's going on right now.
I think I know what you mean, but tell me a little bit more. What's upsetting you lately?
Well, I mean, I guess it's kind of stating the obvious, but George Floyd was killed in Minnesota, along with a lot of other people in other places. And I guess just like on top of that, since then, I mean, I don't know what's like where you are, but here in Chicago, it's been like riots, basically, like a lot of broken windows, property damage, like all of downtown was shut down and businesses damaged in the other neighborhoods too. And like, I don't know, I guess just sometimes I feel like I don't understand why you would destroy the place where you live. Like, how's that gonna help anything?
Wow. Yeah, I totally hear that. It definitely sounds intense. I've heard some people here in South Florida being concerned with property damage too. But the thing I keep thinking about, sticking out in my mind, is why all these protests started in the beginning, because of violence against Black people, right? I think we both agree, people over property. Like the root of all this is that people are being murdered. We can fix the broken window, but we cannot replace a person's life.
Yeah, no, for sure. I mean, no, I'm like totally with you on that. That makes a lot of sense to me. Yeah, I don't know. I guess sometimes maybe what comes up is like, aren't there more effective ways to make a difference than rioting? Like, it just feels really hard to understand how looting is gonna help.
Yeah, I definitely share your curiosity. Something I've learned recently is that we as white people should not be telling or questioning why or how Black people are protesting. Like one way we can support Black activists is by doing their asks, listening to what they need. For example, I've been following requests in my neighborhood for people to contact their local elected officials to push for police accountability. Have you heard of anything like that in Chicago?
No, I mean, I don't know. I don't think I really hear about that kind of stuff very often.
Oh, well, it's easy. A great place to start is social media. Do you follow Black Lives Matter? They're pretty easy to find on Facebook. You can just search Black Lives Matter Chicago. I bet you'll find them. Keep up with ways to participate.
Okay. Let me just, I guess I'll check this out right now here. Oh, yeah, there's like a lot of posts popping up on this first search here.
Yeah.
Okay, cool. Okay, yeah, that sounds good. Like, what else is going on with you?
Oh, well, I started working with some new responsibilities now that we have a smaller staff. But wait, real quick, can I ask you a question?
Yeah, what's up?
Would you mind being an accountability buddy with me? I've been meaning to call my local electeds, but after a long day at work, I'm honestly really tired and kind of intimidated to call them. Maybe we can talk same time next week and check in with each other, see if we've made those calls yet.
Yeah, I guess that sounds okay. I know I was supposed to get you that new sourdough recipe as well, and like, it's always good to talk to you. So yeah, that sounds good. You want to tell me about this other stuff at work?
Oh yeah, I totally forgot about the sourdough recipe. Please give that to me.
I got you, babe.
And we are done.
All right. Okay, let's debrief that. Carly, what did you do in this conversation to mirror the best practices we talked about earlier?
Well, first we connected as people, as cousins, catching up, talking about, unfortunately, what's going on with the pandemic. And then once the conversation got going, I started to lead with curiosity and asking what you were concerned about in this moment. I shared my experience and used to amplify those most affected skills I just learned from you a couple minutes ago as we got into the weeds of everything. Then I redirected and shared values and appealed to your best self when we were talking about finding local Black organizations and making a plan to follow up with each other as action steps.
Word. Thank you for summarizing that. A couple brief notes we just want to mention as caveats. First, this was a fabricated role play. Those are not the views that Carly and I hold at these moments in time in some parts. So if any of our friends and family on the call tonight were surprised, just know. I also want to acknowledge some of the tactics and strategies we offered there, again, are just ideas. There's lots of ways to take action and a lot of other ways to potentially respond to people's arguments or statements that you might have questions about or find problematic. So be creative. This isn't the only way. You can find other ways that fit the right conversations and the right people. I also just want to acknowledge that what we just did may not feel relevant to everyone here. We know there's a lot of people on the call tonight. Everyone's at a different place in their journey with race experience and with anti-racism. This work is ongoing. These conversations are just the beginning. This is not a comprehensive summary of anti-racist practice. On the other hand, I do want to emphasize once again, along the lines of what Raquel was saying earlier in this call, these conversations matter. And they matter because conversations and asks from a trusted person within our own networks have a greater chance of moving someone to action than almost anything else. We know this from organizing, whether that's getting someone to make a plan to vote or inviting them to canvass or ask them to call a member of Congress or anything else, whether higher stakes or low stakes. And in organizing around undoing racism, where what we're talking about can get pretty vulnerable for people pretty fast, these deep listening conversations matter even more. So let's reiterate the ask for this week now in a little bit more detail. Our target ask is for white folks and non-Black folks of color to have 3 of what we're calling learning edge conversations with non-Black people in your life. So by learning edge, I'm talking about those conversations that are maybe a little tricky, that feel a little scary or uncomfortable, that are outside your comfort zone, but still feel safe. And that still, in feeling safe, allow you to learn and grow while being a little bit uncomfortable along the way. If that feels like too much, our medium challenge ask is to have 3 comfort zone conversations. So these might be with people you're already comfortable talking to about race or about the protests, or maybe it's with someone you don't know very well, an acquaintance of some kind. Comfort zones really vary for each person, so notice how that concept arrives for you. But still aim to have 3 conversations and let them be comfortable ones so that you can warm up into doing this work. Okay, and then if that feels not available to you, our sort of baseline ask is to role play one of these conversations with a friend. As we just demonstrated, role playing can be a really helpful way to learn and super valuable. So in what to pick, you could pick something you heard someone say recently that you found offensive and kind of workshop how you would respond next time if you didn't respond in the moment. You could use one of the examples we gave here. You could pick something you read on social media or in the news and just ask your friend to kind of push back on your perspective so you can have practice redirecting them to what you really believe, to anti-racist perspectives and actions. So a note that I want to cover that folks might be curious about is the difference between initiating a conversation versus interrupting or responding to a comment in real time in the midst of a conversation that's already happening. So in our view, both of these conversations matter. Calling people in the midst of a conversation that's already happening is just as important, if not more so, than starting something fresh. If you have the opportunity to respond to something problematic someone says in the moment, like go for it. That can count as one of your 3. Maybe there'll be more than 3 too. This is an ongoing part of anti-racist practice. So, and on the other hand, if you're not encountering those moments naturally right now, maybe due to social distancing or for any other reason, just pick 3 people in your life to reach out to and initiate the conversation, kind of like how it naturally came up as my ostensible cousin Carly and I just experienced. So, and you can embed it in the general experience of catching up and staying in touch. Okay, another note, some folks might be curious about social media. What do we do about those moments on social media where we see something problematic? It's gonna be really common on Facebook, other places, and it can be hard to know what to do in response. Right now for this ask, we're asking you to have these conversations one-on-one with your live voices, like in person, on phone, or on video. That said, we just want to acknowledge some baseline best practices for responding on social media because we know it can just be so common in people's lives. So a couple of real quick notes on this. Social media conversations are real. They can make an impact. On the other hand, social media is not the only place or space that exists. So what that means is that you want to kind of be judicious with your energy. If you wouldn't mind going to the next slide, please, real quick here. As I like to say to myself, Social media giveth energy and information, and it also taketh away. So we don't want to get lost here. Our energy is really needed offline as well. When you do get into conversations of calling folks in or calling out, try focusing your energy on groups or people who are closer to you in relationship in some way. That's probably going to make the biggest impact. And good news is that all the kind of conversation best practices we just covered still apply. So even in written or social media conversation. Cool. All right. I think that we are ready for the Q&A. Wow, can't believe we made it. Carly and Raquel, y'all want to get back on here, and I believe Sarah is going to be passing us a couple of questions from the Q&A and other spaces.
All right, sorry, y'all, we are just reading them. Oh, this is an interesting one. I don't know, Nora, Raquel, if you want to take this. Any tips on conversations when there's a power imbalance, such as your boss or something?
That is such a great question. Thanks to whoever asked it. Anybody feel super compelled to take a stab?
I can, if folks. Yeah.
Carly, why don't you go for it?
I think when having these conversations is really tricky, especially when there's a power dynamic. In whether it's your boss, maybe it's someone, you know, a parent that's funding college or something like that. I think obviously first thing is make sure that you are safe, that you are taking care of yourself, and then ask if you can have a really heart-to-heart conversation and say, hey, can we go out for coffee outside of the office? I want to talk to you about something. Or, you know, I'm not sure where this person works. If you have a ally in your HR department or somebody maybe on your leadership team that you can reach out to, that's always a good option as well.
Another thought that I'm having is, and thank you, Carly, for that first start. I think there's an important balance to strike here between maintaining your own safety and security and keeping in mind, if you're a person of relative privilege, the ways in which people who don't have the kind of privilege that you have don't always have access to the safety and security that you might have by not speaking up to that person in that moment. I think it's just going to vary really case by case what kind of call you make about starting that conversation. But I think it can be really important to keep in mind, like, I might be scared of retaliation from my boss, but what am I sacrificing on behalf of maybe speaking up for a coworker, or flagging something that's really not okay, to balance out some of that fear. So it's complicated, but that's a thought.
We had another one that I thought was really great, and that is, you know, folks don't talk on the phone that much anymore. Can you have these kinds of conversations on text?
I'll take a first stab at that. So it is really hard to have very, very deep conversations over text, and especially since a lot of these concepts we'll be grappling with are deeply emotional. Trying to, you know, type a whole novel with your thumbs can sometimes take a long time, and especially since it's hard to convey tone over text. It's hard to let someone know that you really care and are listening to them when you just respond, okay, cool. So I would definitely, text feels much more comfortable, and I've been having to break myself out of specifically only texting people, but especially in this time of social distancing, I really encourage us to actually reach out and have that phone conversation with somebody. If it's easier just to find a time over text, maybe communicate with someone, hey, are you free for a few minutes to chat? Might be a good way to get around that, but I definitely encourage us to have these real conversations, because there's so much more communication that happens just through your tone and the way you say things that is lost when you're trying to text.
Awesome. Another question we got is it worth talking to someone who's in their 7 days and seemingly very stuck in other ways? And I'm going to apologize because my mom is on the call and she's close to that age. So love 70s, yay. I think totally. I totally think these conversations, maybe it's one smaller conversation and it's like an incremental, but why not? Any other thoughts on that?
I would totally agree. Yeah. Every conversation is great practice. So you might really learn something even if you don't perceive yourself as having made a difference.
I would also say that you can be very, very surprised by who is movable if you really connect with them on a deeply emotional level with something that they also care about. I recently had a conversation with some older people in my family, and I was very pleasantly surprised by how little work I actually had to do. I assumed that they were on the wrong side of this, and they weren't. So definitely take that challenge.
This is a great question. When you speak up and get white fragility in return, how do you conclude the conversation?
Wow, I just want to take a moment to shout out these questions. I just feel like these are really, really great questions. And I feel like there's something really, really meaningful about just coming to the questions and naming it, and then being in the process of finding answers. Yeah, shout out to y'all. That said, I got so excited about the question that I haven't thought about an answer. So if anybody else wants to respond briefly while I think on it.
I think it goes back to, really talking to that person and saying, hey, what you might be experiencing right now is actually a concept called white fragility, and explaining it to them and explaining white guilt and really, just like Nora said during the call, offer them to watch documentaries if maybe they don't want to hear it from you. Movies and media can be a great tool. Nora, I don't know if during that you thought of any answers, or Raquel, you unmuted.
Yes, my one addition to what you said, Carly, and I'm a very feels type of person, so I'm probably always going to come back here. But be vulnerable and share, what that learning moment was for you as well, because people can gain a lot from that. And I know for myself, through my own journey, sort of taking those steps back as I lay it out for other people was a really good way for them to start to understand it themselves. So be really honest and vulnerable with them, and they'll be more willing to trust and hear what you're saying.
Cool. And I'm actually going to kick this answer off to Leah Greenberg, who's our co-founder and co-executive director. We're getting a lot of questions in the chat about why defunding the police. So Leah, take it away.
Hi there. Can folks hear me okay?
Yeah, we can hear you.
Okay, great. And can you see me okay? Am I back on? Okay, great. Wonderful. Thank you. Okay, so hearing questions about why defund the police. And so I'll take that a little bit of a step back and say, obviously this is a challenge. This is something that has been happening for a long time. And what we really want what we were urging people here to do is go beyond some of the piecemeal reforms that have been proposed that are about kind of like holding individual cops accountable, right? Like body cameras. We've seen a lot of situations in which cops just take off their body camera and then do something terrible. You actually have to go at this system of social control, and you have to rethink what is possible in our communities. And so a lot of times when we think about, how have police been set up in our communities, what we're seeing is we've got a society where governments are swelling police budgets to maintain control instead of actually investing that money in addressing our problems. So we put police in schools instead of fully funding the schools themselves to actually support students. We have police arrest homeless and mentally ill folks instead of fully funding mental health services, housing services, social services. Defund the police is this call to push beyond this focus on piecemeal reforms to try to check those bad apples and actually reimagine a system where you're investing in communities to actually address the problems that currently are being treated with over-policing and with terrorizing communities. And I should say, I'm speaking about communities in general. It's really important to note that this is particularly the way and how this has impacted Black and Brown communities specifically. Is that helpful for folks?
Yes, thank you so much.
All right, and our last question, thanks Leah for jumping back on video, is any tips about dealing with a small group compared to a one-on-one?
You know, a gut instinct is go for it. I don't know about other folks. I've had really positive learning experiences in the context of like a therapeutic group setting, like group therapy. Obviously, that's a very different kind of space to be professionally held than just casual friend circles or family networks. But there's some really amazing magic that can happen with a number of people in the room and ways that different perspectives can kind of amplify each other or balance each other out. I'm sure somebody out there has written a great book about how to have, or a great article of some kind about how to have small group conversations about anti-racism. Let's go find it. And in the meantime, try it out and let us know what you find.
All right, y'all. Thank you so much for joining us tonight. I'm going to pass it to Raquel to do our closing. If we didn't answer your question, we apologize. We have a ton of them. I see a future training in our future. I see a training in our future, near future. So thank you so much for the questions. Raquel?
Thank you. Thank you, Carly. And thank you all so much for sharing this time with us. Thank you for all of your questions. And thank you for sitting with anything that was uncomfortable and really just sticking with us. Again, this is just the tip of the iceberg. And we really encourage you to go deeper under the surface and learn more. And to help you pursue your anti-racist education beyond tonight, you will see on the screen some extra resources you can explore. Indivisible has also put together a resource guide that we can share in the chat box for Facebook Live, and we'll email to people joining on Zoom. This went out earlier in the week, so you may have already seen it, but it's a really great resource, again, built in solidarity with communities of color and particularly Black-led organizations. Remember, we are all in this together. Value people over property, follow the lead of Black-led organizations, and take action safely. Thank you all again. Wash your hands, don't touch your face, love and support each other. We'll see you next time. Thank you so much.
Thank you.